My name is Ariele, and today's class is going to be a core oriented yoga class. And just a little bit of background about me. I am a yoga teacher, obviously, and a physical therapist. And so over the years, my style of teaching yoga has really transformed from being more about the flow and the vinyasa and the dance and the even the alignment to now kind of merging more and more with what I teach as a physical therapist or what I just know would be therapeutic for my own body. And as a distinction, when I say the word therapeutic, it doesn't always mean easy or gentle, right? So a therapeutic movement class or yoga class in my mind is one that maybe would strengthen our glutes, one that would strengthen our cores, and one that might strengthen our calves. It's really going to be, for the most part, a strength oriented practice because I find that we go from sitting, which is a lot of hip flexion, sometimes some spinal flexion. And even for those among us who are pretty active, we often go from a very sedentary situation in our days to a more like explosive activity. By explosive, I mean something like playing tennis or jogging or running or um, or chasing the dog in the yard. I don't know. So coming to a place of true resilience is what really interests me for all of my students, all of my patients, and even my own self. So I teach to the best extent that I can what I think will be therapeutic and resilient for you. And so everybody's obviously starting in their own place. Today, we're going to focus a bit on the core and we'll just get started. Actually, one of the things that we can do that brings us the most resilience in our lives is meditation and mindfulness. And they do not have to be complicated. So we're just going to drop in, get our mindfulness on, get our micro meditation on, and imbue everything we do in this class with that. So find a comfortable seat, one that's comfortable for you. Roll your shoulders a little bit. I think of the rib cage, both the top and the bottom of the rib cage, as being stacked right over the pelvis. So I want to make sure that the pelvis is not tilted forward. I want to make sure that the pelvis is not tilted backwards. I want to make sure that the rib cage is not tilted back, which would be that flip up, open hearted position. We don't actually want that, nor is it tilted forward in that slumped position. So it's just a very boring neutral. On top of that, shoulders roll, ears usually drift back a little. It should actually feel effortless to have good posture. Notice any muscles in the face that are tensioning that don't need to be. Notice any added easefulness that you can imbue into your breath. And just with generosity and kindness, notice any thoughts that come up. If you are an anxious type, I invite you to, rather than um, push that away, to embrace it, to really be okay with that, and to notice those tendencies in your body to jump into the future or jump into the past. And instead of hanging out there, return to this moment right now as often as you need to. by thinking of your breath, by thinking of the texture of the blanket you're sitting on, if you're sitting on a blanket like me, by feeling the air on your skin, by becoming aware of the muscles of your face, the weight of your elbows. One more easeful breath in and easeful breath out. We'll bring our palms together over the heart, representing wholeness. As you inhale, open your eyes. Set your blanket off to the side for now. And let's just do a little bit of gentle warm up. Reach your legs out in front of you and kind of splay them out. So this already starts to warm up our wrists by having them behind you. And we can start to warm up the hips by rocking your toes inward on one side and then inward on the other side, or inward and outward. So a little windshield wiper action. If you pay attention to your knees, your kneecaps here, they're also wiping in and out. And that's a good indication that the motion is coming from the hip. One of the biggest joints in the body. We're just really working to wake that up and activate, in particular, our rotators, our hip rotators. Set your feet flat, lower yourself down, and we'll say hello to our spines now. Flatten your back by tilting your pelvis back, front hip points up, and start to lift your tailbone, your glutes. Your feet can be as wide apart as feels comfortable and rise into a low bridge. So this is a low bridge pose. Shoulders, hips, and knees are either in line or the hips are a little bit lower. And I'm lowering down, trying to get each and every centimeter of my spine laid back down onto the floor gracefully. We'll take it in the other direction and again try to peel your spine off the floor like a sticker. Start to feel your glutes, your maybe your hamstrings a little bit, maybe even your core a little bit here. And then if you'd like a little extra feedback, you can put your thumbs on your low ribs and your pinkies on your front hip points. And the idea is that you don't want the rib cage and the pinkies to spread very far apart. At the top of this bridge, you might be tempted to really stick your belly to the sky, but I encourage you to instead focus more on the legs, more on this spinal neutral position. And let's just do one more rolling bridge, rolling up and down the spine. Yes. And then draw your knees into your chest. Rock a little side to side. So there are a couple of different schools of thought when we're teaching neutral spine versus flattened spine, right? So a neutral spine, you can set your feet down on the floor. There is a little bit of a gap between your low back and the floor. And a flattened spine is actually you using your belly muscles and sometimes your leg muscles to smush your low back down into the floor. So I have heard some Pilates teachers say, don't do this. And I think that's true in order to stay true to the origin and purpose of Pilates. But I do often teach this, and I do often teach it very simply because this is the position that we're in a lot of the day, whether we know it or not. And this teaches us core activation in that position. It sort of teaches us control of our pelvis, our lumbopelvic area. I think a little bit better. Whereas if you stay in the neutral, you end up using your low back muscles potentially more than you would use your front abdominal muscles. So let's experiment. Feet snuggle in a little closer to your hips, probably than they were for bridge. Flatten your back. and go ahead and just straighten one leg out. Now, this is a funny shape because the leg that's straightening out is trying to like create a little arch in my back again. But I'm using this leg that's the foot flat on the floor, and I'm using my belly muscles to keep it flat. So the result is I feel a bit of a stretch across the part of my body that gets tight when I sit. Yes, that's the hip flexors. Draw this leg in, relax, flatten your back. Other leg, leg is out and engaged and long. Core is activated. It's not like a big core action here, but it's a little bit. And then draw this leg in. Flatten the back. Other leg long. Maybe feels 5% more free now. I recommend also engaging your glutes of this straight leg. Draw this leg in. Flatten your back and take it to the other side. And draw everything in. Walk your heels out from you a little bit. If you would like to use your block here, you can. You can put it in the medium or perhaps even the wide position in between your thighs. And you're going to squeeze the block just a little bit. Draw your front hip points up, posterior pelvic tilt. Dig your heels in. And now you're going to feel your adductors. That's the muscles on the inside of your thighs, and your hamstrings on the back of your legs a little bit more. Yes, hold it, dig the heels in, try to really activate. If you get a cramp, come on down and use the corner of the block to kind of massage out your muscles. And we're all going to lower down and flip the block or the throw pillow, if that's what you have, into the skinny position between your thighs. Please bring your hands behind your head. Knees stay at about a 90-degree angle, and I like to hammer the block between the legs. Toes spread. I'm bringing the knees up and over towards that right elbow, down and forward, up and over towards that left elbow, down and forward. And then join me in tracing an infinity symbol, a sideways figure 8, right and left. Yes. Whew. If you notice your arms trying to do the work for you, as I just did, then point your elbows towards the sky. It adds a little bit of instability. You might not be able to go as far, but it should be nice and fun. Indeed. Especially if you have an uneven mat, as mine is a little bit today. And then just come to center. Again, keeping your elbows off the mat. Drift your knees a little to the right and hold. So I'm about 45 degrees, maybe a little shy of that to the right. And I want you to separate your feet. Try to draw your lowest ribs back down to the floor, these guys, yes. And then come back through to center. Knees go over to the left. If you feel yourself going into that arch position, draw your low ribs back down to the floor. Try not to use your arms. Spread your toes, separate your feet. Come back through to center. One more little playful thing with this. We're going to straighten the legs. By the way, don't worry about how straight your knees go. And activate your feet. And we're just going to draw a big circle here or an infinity symbol. Infinity symbol, for those who don't know, just looks like the figure 8 going sideways. Tracing all of that, waking up all those little stability muscles happening in the center of our torsos. And then come on down and we'll do a little bit more conventional core work. So come back to that 90-degree position, elbows wide. And we're gonna curl the shoulder blades a little bit off the floor, head and shoulder blades. I'm actually pushing my head a little bit into my hands, lengthening the back of the neck. And then I'm gonna lower down one leg just to tap, and then the other. Tap the toes or the heel down. Try to breathe in and out through your nose, keeping the low back and the low ribs connected to the ground. If your neck is not liking this position, you can always put it right back down, right? But adding the head up gives us a little added core work, right? So One last time, right and left, and then release. We're going to bring both legs up towards the sky, straight-ish. Remember, it's not about how straight your knees are. Spread your toes, and then keeping the back flat, lower one leg to a hover, keeping everything connected. Rise it up, and other leg. Rise it up. This is our Hasta Padangusasana, where the hand touches the foot, right? But in on our backs in a core-oriented position. Dynamic movement. One more time, each side. So right goes down if you're leading with the right, and then left. Squeeze everything to midline and really focus way less on what my legs do than what my torso is doing. And then open your legs a little bit here. So a narrow V or a big V, and then crisscross thigh over thigh. Open and crisscross. Open and crisscross. Start to add a little curl of the tailbone up if you feel comfortable doing that. It might not look like much. Mine doesn't look like much. My floor is making all these creaking noises here, which is hilarious. Yes. Curl, curl. Last one. Curl, and then draw your knees to your chest. Rock a little side to side. Come back to the 90-90 position. Come back to the hands behind the head, fingers slightly interlaced, lightly interlaced. Elbows stay wide here. And the idea is that I'm actually curling, sort of really turning to the side, right? And I'm bringing one leg forward about 45 degrees, aiming to get the elbow and the knee close in contact with one another without just using my elbow like a wing, right? Elbows wide, curl, lengthen. Yes. Inhale, head presses down. Exhale. Inhale down. Aim to make these movements as even as you can, right to left. You can add this breathing too. Most of the yoga twists, especially ones that involve a little bit of roundedness in the spine. So I'm thinking like a side crow, for example, or revolved side angle, which at some point does involve a little roundedness. This is the muscular component of those poses. What are you doing with your toes? It doesn't matter, right? I like to floint my feet a lot, which is kind of pointing at the ankle and flexing, curling the toes back towards the eyes. It's actually technically extension in anatomy terms, but that's okay. You're going to draw everything in, sort of apanasana, knees to chest, rock a little side to side, and then separate your knees so it's starting to look a bit like happy baby. But like a lazy happy baby, right? So I like to just kind of rock a little side to side here, nourishment for the hips. And then bring your knees more or less in line with your pelvis. So this is going to look like, if you know the yoga shape, Mandukasana or frog pose, if I were belly down, my knees would be on the floor, right? I don't like that shape. And so it's fine on the back, but in a face down, belly down shape, it's really hard, I think, in the hips. So we're going to do this on our backs, and we're going to pretend that our feet are on a plate, one of those squat total gym machines at the gym, right? Where you put your feet on the plate and you press it, right? So imagine your feet are on a plate, or you can actually spin and put your feet on a wall. And you're going to curl your tailbone up without drawing your knees in. And if you feel comfortable, you're going to curl your tail up, curl your head up, interlace your fingers, reach between the legs. Notice how tempting it would be to curl your knees to the chest, and you're not doing that. Come on down. Switch the interlace of your fingers. Kali Mudra, that's the one where your fingers point forward. And switch. Push the feet and rise. And if you need the support for your head, this is what that looks like. Goddess pose. Mandukasana. I can't tell if my device is still on. I think it is. And reaching. One more each side. Good. Draw everything in. Rock a little side to side. Last thing we're going to do on our backs for now, I would invite you to cross your right ankle over your left knee and float your knees up just to belly button height, more or less. If you want to, you can go ahead and take what's called the full eagle shape here, tucking your top leg under your left. But I don't like that anymore. My knees just don't like that. So I just stopped doing it. So I'm going to just do thigh over thigh, and that's plenty. I'm going to activate my feet here and hands to the back of the head, but really just to make sure that my arms are occupied. Drawing a big circle with my knees. And basically, I'm making this circle bigger and bigger. My floor is so talkative. Switch the direction of this circle, trace the edges a little bit bigger and bigger. Try not to use your arms. Smiling if that feels authentic to you. Last one. Yes, and then release. Remember which leg was on top. Feet are flat to the floor, but they're super wide apart. And you're just going to drift your knees all the way to the right, all the way to the left. Let yourself unwind. Yes. And coming back through to center, let's cross the left thigh over the right. Okay. Legs up, toes up. You're going to draw a big circle here. Let the circle get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger as you go. Go clockwise and counterclockwise. Connecting to breath. This is one of those shapes, one of those actions where you're definitely going to notice how your low back wants to pop up off the floor and maybe really, not just maybe, but actually counter that movement as best as you can. Yes, draw it back in, open the knees a little bit side to side, and then totally roll onto one side. So the next thing I want to play with in terms of the core is really getting into our obliques. And one of the best ways to do that is through side plank. You can stay on your elbow or you can prop up onto your hand. And you're going to push up first, staying on your shins, right? So staying on your shins forces you to really use your glutes, press your glutes forward. And then you can maybe already notice if you have a tendency to flare your low ribs forward. So draw that in if so. Top arm's going to reach towards the sky and you're going to dive under. If you are on your elbow, you just have a little bit less space for this, right? So you're diving under. Now notice that as I dive under, I'm not trying to sit back. There's nothing really wrong with sitting back. You can sit back if you'd like, but I'm interested in the control of the trunk, the upper part of the trunk. So maybe experiment with a little bit of both. What is it like to just do the arm under and up? And what does it feel like to really sit back? Is that your legs doing the work, or do you still feel the torso muscles? Nothing wrong with either of those, just experiment. Good. And last one, come onto your belly. Squeeze your shoulder blades towards one another. Float your thighs a little bit off the floor. Come into a full Superman. So back body is completely woken up. Keep squeezing, palms face down towards the floor. Fingers are long. Shoulder blades are moving toward one another. And then root your hands. Rise onto hands and knees. And just get your wrist a little bit warmed up by rocking in table pose, right, left, front, back. Curl your toes under if you'd like. Float your knees. Rock a little forward, back, side to side. Good. Lower down through the knees. Let's take it to the other side. Side plank, hand or forearm. Squeeze the legs together if that makes sense for you. Press up. Feel if your ribs want to go in front of the rest of your body. Remember, we're trying to keep that alignment here. Top arm reaches, and then it dives under. Top arm reaches and dives. My hair is everywhere. It is on my arm. It is on my carpet. That's okay. And last one or two, remember you can rock back with your pelvis and you can experiment with that. I want you to balance anything that you did on the other side on this side, and then find that neutrality and then lower your pelvis. Straighten out through your top leg, bend your bottom knee up a little bit, and drive your elbow down into the ground. So, this top leg, think of it a bit like a lever. It's attaching, like if you put your hand on your waist right now and you're hovering that leg, these muscles are probably working pretty hard, as are the muscles on the outside of the hip, in the back of the hip to hold you up, hold the leg up. So, what I want you to do is sort of cinch up through your waist. This is a little bit abstract, but think about like your pelvis is tilting towards your head. This is a side bend of the spine, which I know you are all capable of doing. And it, instead of being initiated from the upper body, we're initiating it from the lower body. So that's the weird part. Go ahead and balance this out on the other side. Bottom knee is bent. Top arm is rooted. Top or bottom arm, I suppose. Top leg is just solid and straight, and you're tilting your pelvis. If this block were my pelvis, it's just beep, like that, right? Put your hand on your waist if that is helpful for you to feel those muscles activating there. This is a cousin of an exercise that I teach in physical therapy called basking seal, right? Where we're really working these core diagonals that we need for walking, that we need for climbing, that we need for crawling, for all these human movements. And then come all the way down into your belly again. Let's get to the back of our trunk a couple of different ways. So number one, we're going to work the legs. You're going to bend your knees and try to lift both thighs off the floor. Squeeze your glutes. This will not look like much, but it will probably feel like a lot. So all that's really happening is I'm kind of getting to the point where I can glide slide a piece of paper under my knees on each side. Posterior chain activated, glutes really activated, hamstrings are working a little bit here too, but they're not in the most optimal position to work, right? Shake that out. Let your legs be soft now. Lift your head and shoulders, and now you're working the back body muscles above the pelvis. Squeeze the shoulder blades back. We're going to hold it a bit. Come into the W shape of the arms if you'd like, and work on reaching and reaching, reaching and reaching. And then to make it extra hard, both arms go forward. And then hands root. Rise onto your hands and knees onto table pose. And just again, draw some circles. We did kind of forward and back last time, but let's draw some circles this time. I mentioned in the beginning how I've moved away from a lot of alignment teaching in my teaching, which probably surprises folks to hear that from a physical therapist. But by that, what I mean is that a lot of the alignment cues from yoga that we have all inherited are very geometric based and not very human based. They're based on like this 90-degree angle at the wrist. They're based on things like your first finger or your middle finger pointing forward, where in reality, your body probably wants to turn your fingers out, probably wants to have the wrist just a little bit in front of the shoulders, and that most likely would feel much more comfortable. If you look at the way like people would naturally get on hands and knees, it's not as rigid as we teach in yoga. And what I really want to honor is the natural movement and the natural tendency of the human body and sort of fortifying that. And by natural tendency, I don't mean like the tendency of what's happened with chairs. So get into a position where you can curl your toes under, maybe even rock back to spread your toes a little bit more and get some more mobility in the toes, which is a fundamental movement we tend to lose these days. And as you shift forward, I want you to hover your knees 1 or 2 inches off the floor. Good. Now, as you do this, see if you can come onto your right fingertips and still stay low. And then lower that right hand down and come onto your left fingertips and still stay low. Come on out of that because that can be a lot on the wrists really quickly. Walk yourself forward onto your forearms, back, knees stay down, knee down, glute squeeze, back of the neck long, plank. Good. Toes curl under, rise it up into a forearm plank, full length. Squeeze your glutes, round your upper back. And then lower down to your knees, root your hands, and then let's see if we can bring that core bear crawl spirit into our downward facing dog. So hands start in front of your shoulders, fingers grip, glide forward a little bit, inchworm forward, hover your knees, find your neutral spine, and then we're rising up and we're not pushing our rib cage forward, right? We're keeping the ribs almost tucked in, even keeping the knees bent, pushing strongly through the arms, then coming into our downward facing dog. This down dog, by the way, is a little shorter than if it were what I would call a full length down dog, because a full length down dog is going to make for a full length plank. Come into your straight arm plank, back of the neck long, glutes squeezed. Hold it. And then downward facing dog. Okay? Lower down through the knees. Take any seat that's comfortable. Wiggle it out through the wrists. Do the wave. And then we're going to play with a dynamic kind of hybrid between all of the core work that we've done, yoga, bear crawl, everything, okay? So we're going to try to tie a lot of that stuff that we've already done together as like a skill stacking activity. From our short downward facing dog, shift it forward till you're kind of halfway between plank and halfway into bear crawl. Spin your toes to one side, let that same side arm come up and kick it out. And come right back into your halfway between down dog, halfway between bear crawl. Other side to the extent that you have the room. Switch, and the point is to keep your hips low here. If you can do this slowly with control, you can probably start to do it more quickly. We're going to give our wrists a break in just a moment. One more side just to even things out for me, and then come on down. Find a comfortable seat, shake it out. In fact, let's be kneeling while we shake out our wrists. Make fists, and then jazz hands, and then fists, and then jazz hands, circling through the fullness of the wrists. Before we get back into that, one leg comes out to the side. I call this the proposal position. Bring one hand to the belly, one hand to the chest, drop in and out. We're getting good hip warm up, good knee warm up, good mobility that has a purpose to it, not for the purpose of showing off how deep we get. You can change the angle of this. The hands are on the torso to make sure that you're actually getting this movement from your pelvis, from your legs, and not from your spine, right? And we'll take it to the other side. And let's come on back to our hands and knees. And again, we're going to do one more thing for our wrists. So start on your fingertips here. And I do think that this little detail is important. If your fingers, like mine, kind of can reverse into that hyper extended position, you really want to make sure you keep the hook, especially in that last little joint. So come onto your fingertips and then flatten your hands and come back onto your fingertips. It seems very, very simple, but for many of us, about 5 of these, 10 of these, is going to start to fatigue out the muscles of the forearm and the wrists and the hands. A lot of the muscles of the hands are actually in the forearms, and so if you start to feel a bit of a burn there, then you know you might need a little bit more of this in particular. Okay, shake it out. Get your hands into a position that feels reasonable for you, nice little stretch, and then finding yourself back into table. We're going to change things up a little bit. Same thing we did before, but with a little extra. Toes curl, knees lift. As you spin to your left, left hand comes up, left knee reaches down, right leg goes through, and then the right foot touches down. Now we're in reverse table because that left hand came down. We're going to spin it all the way around. You could also call this the crab position, right? So we're going to spin and try to come right back into the same shape that we're in before. The tricky part for me with this is making sure that I don't get all discombobulated and land in another room in my house, right? So I'll show you that from the other direction. Bear crawl, spin to the right, come through. I kind of have to put my right hand very close to my left to reorient so that I'm still on my yoga mat. Not that it would be bad if you had more space than me, but just most of us don't. Crab position, still staying off the ground unless you need a rest, and then spinning back. Watch that my hips don't really bust up to the sky, and then unwind, find your way. Other direction. Move. Make it as smooth as possible, like a little barrel roll. And then other direction. Yes. Other direction. There's a lot more hand movement than I originally instructed here. So notice that the first thing I'm doing in order to stay on my yoga mat is I'm moving that hand over. Last one. And settle. Go ahead and take a child's pose if you'd like. Take a couple of breaths here. What I think is easy to notice when you start doing functional core work inside of a yoga class, you start doing more dynamic movement and less stretching movement, is you very quickly start to notice that it will make your heart rate go up, and it just uses a different set of techniques to be in constant motion. If you have a regular athletic practice outside of yoga, this might not be new to you, but if yoga has been your main source of movement, then it's good to challenge yourself in more varying ways. We're all coming out of child's pose now. Take a nice full breath. And then I'm going to encourage you to sit at a minimum on your blanket, kind of folded up a bit. So I'm going to take my block out in front. And the spirit of what we're about to do is to co-coordinate hip flexors and core, and obliques for that matter. So I'm going to show you from the beginning from a straight on position. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is drive one sitting bone down to lift the other up. Then drive the other sitting bone down to lift the first one up. Switch, switch, right? Back and forth. Okay, here's what I want you to know about this movement. This is that diagonal core movement that I was talking about earlier that's a fundamental part of walking, basking seal, etc. When this movement is good, it can really be helpful and healing to our hips, both our glutes and our hip flexors, and of course our spines, and it can create more stability. So I happen to have a couple of blocks here, but the next movement we're going to do might involve a little bit of that side to side stuff. Here's why. You're going to have your legs stretched out in front of you. Make sure that both of your sitting bones are rooted, and legs are going to form a bit of a V shape. You're going to connect your core, lean perhaps to one side, and then float that leg up and over your block. If that's too crazy for you, then you can just sort of lightweight, kind of hover it over the ground, right? So you're moving it from point A to point B, or up and over the block. Now, what's the difference with this movement versus just having your hand on your toe, right? And moving your leg in and out? Well, the hand on the toe is what's called a passive movement. So some other body part is doing the movement of the limb. And this is an active movement. And specifically, we're asking the hip flexors to engage, to coordinate with your trunk in that leaning oblique activation, and then to also rest, right? So now that leg's going to rest. Bring your block over to the other side if you're using the block. And then rooting through your sitting bones, lean to the other side to lift, rise up and over. The biggest and first line of defense for tightness is, I'm almost always going to suggest, is strengthening the opposite. Oopsies. So these muscles around your neck tight, strengthen the muscles at the underside of your shoulder blades. Second line of defense is to engage that muscle that feels tight. That's what we're doing right now. For anybody who has tight hip flexors, we are engaging those hip flexors and we're saying, hello, 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 work on our behalf. We're coordinating with you. We're mapping you to your brain, to our brains. And come back through to center. And then just keep the legs wide. Tilt your pelvis a little side to side. My whole blanket and block are rocking with me, and that's okay. And then come on down from there. Just sit in whatever position on the floor feels comfortable. We're going to glide our hands forward, not for a big stretch, but almost more for a yawn, like a pandiculation of our bodies. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale forward, hold it, and inhale into your back body, letting your breath move back there and start to move a little side to side. Really doesn't matter what you do, so long as you're not yanking, pulling, passively stretching on any particular limbs. Bring your legs in. If yours were stretched out like mine, you might bring the soles of your feet together if that seems reasonable. And just rock a little side to side. Go ahead and rock and fully get your sitting bone off the ground on one side than the other. This is absolutely fundamental to good trunk control. You can look one side and then the other. Getting that neck, spinal control. Grabbing your blanket, go ahead and roll up your blanket. We've got one last kind of fiery core activity here. It's just the one that I've been sort of excited to practice and to teach lately. This is going to go at our lowest ribs, okay? Place the feet flat for starters, and the rolled up blanket, you might even want your blanket roll a little tighter than mine, underneath your lowest ribs. Now, years ago, including some classes I have on YouTube, I had this as a passive movement. I no longer teach that. So what I teach now is we've got this as a prompt, and we're working the muscles of the core to get ourselves back to neutral, okay? Hands can be behind the head if you need that support. Chin stays close to the chest. One arm can be long or both. Little curl ups to neutral. Slow motion lowering. That's a really important piece of this. And then slowly all the way onto your back, slide the blanket under your pelvis and just feel your spine like a hammock for a couple of breaths. There's no need to hold. There's no need to hold on to anything, any tension in the body. And if there's any final moves you'd like to make, like a knees to chest or a gentle twist where you drop your knees to the right and the left, you can do that now. You can position yourself for a happy shavasana by sliding the blanket roll under your thighs. Or you can join me in a seated meditation if you prefer. And there's no right or wrong if you choose the shavasana or the meditation. The most important part is really coming back into the mindfulness framework aware of when your brain, your mind likes to go into the future or the past, and just boomeranging it back again and again to the present. The way we do that is through awareness of sensation. So you can notice the parts of your body that are in contact with the ground. You can send appreciation to the support for the ground beneath you. You can notice the breeze on your skin if you have one, the air touching your skin, the clothes touching your skin, the textures. And then let's return our awareness or tune our awareness to our breath, watching the fluidity of the inhale and the exhale. How still can we get with our thoughts today? You're welcome to stay longer in Shavasana, in meditation. Feel free to turn off this device if you wish. If you're ready to wake up, start to send some energy into your fingers, into your toes, to your shoulders, chest, circling at the head and neck. And we'll take a full breath in. Big exhale. If you'd like, you can roll to your side, gently pressing up to a seated position. And seated, we bring our palms either flat over the heart, if that feels good to you, or palms together in front of the heart, symbolizing union, symbolizing that all the parts of ourselves meshing into one, and symbolizing the way that we are just a speck in this great sea of all the known and unknown entities of the world, of the universe. May this practice serve to fortify us, to imbue resilience. May this practice keep us strong and healthy to live happy, good lives. Thank you so much for being here. Feel free to bow with me if that moves you, and open your eyes when you are ready.